I'm a 28-year-old man, and my family mocked my late uncle's obsession with cryptocurrency for over a decade. At the reading of his will, my aunt held up his hardware wallet, called it a useless plastic toy, and tossed it to me as a joke. I almost threw it away, until I remembered a strange conversation we had when I was a teenager. That conversation was worth $8.4 million. I have always been the quiet one in my family. I work as a university archivist, a job I love that involves dusty books and forgotten histories. It is a stable life, but not a flashy one. In my family, flash is everything. My cousins are real estate agents and stockbrokers. They drive luxury cars and talk about their portfolios at every family gathering. And then there was my Uncle Arthur. He was the family's designated eccentric, the weirdo, the black sheep. Arthur was a software engineer back in the 80s and 90s, a true pioneer. He saw the future coming long before anyone else did. And for the last 15 years of his life, his greatest obsession was cryptocurrency. I remember him at Thanksgiving dinner in 2013, trying to explain Bitcoin to my family. He was practically vibrating with excitement, talking about decentralization, blockchain, and the end of traditional finance. My other uncle, a mortgage broker, just laughed in his face. He told Arthur to stop playing with magic internet money and put his savings into something real, like property. My Aunt Carol, the family matriarch, would just sigh and tell him not to bore everyone with his computer nonsense. They treated him like a child. A brilliant but deeply misguided child. I was the only one who listened. I did not understand most of it, especially when I was younger, but I was fascinated by his passion. He would pull me aside and show me charts on his laptop, his eyes gleaming. He saw a kindred spirit in me, someone who was more interested in ideas than in bragging about a commission. Our bond was forged over his weird hobbies and my quiet curiosity. He was the only person in the family who asked about my work and actually listened to the answer. He never called my job boring. He called it curating the human story. He was my ally, my friend, and in many ways, the only person in my family who truly saw me. Arthur passed away 2 months ago after a short illness. It was sudden, and it left a huge hole in my life. The rest of the family was sad, of course, but their grief was quickly overshadowed by a frenetic, greedy energy. The whispers about his will started before the funeral was even over. Arthur had never married and had no children, so his estate was to be divided among his siblings and their kids. My family descended on his small, cluttered house like vultures, pointing out which of his belongings they wanted, their eyes scanning for hidden value. It was disgusting. I just wanted to be left alone with my memories of him. Update 1. The day we all met with the estate lawyer was exactly as tense and transactional as I had imagined. My Aunt Carol, who Arthur had inexplicably named as the executor, sat at the head of the table like a queen holding court. The lawyer, a tired-looking man named Mr. Davies, read through the will. It was straightforward. His house was to be sold, and the proceeds, along with his stock portfolio and savings, were to be divided equally. It was a substantial amount, and I could see my cousins doing mental calculations, their eyes gleaming. Then, Mr. Davies got to a final, unusual clause. It mentioned all digital and cryptographic assets. He paused and took off his glasses. He explained that Arthur had left a note mentioning these assets, but that he had no passwords, no access keys, and no idea of their value, if any. He said given the volatility of such things, they should be considered essentially worthless unless a clear access path could be found. My uncle, the mortgage broker, scoffed loudly. He said so much for Arthur's big digital fortune. He said he was probably broke from buying all that fake money. Later that week, while cleaning out Arthur's home office, my Aunt Carol found it. It was a small, sleek device about the size of a USB stick with a tiny screen. It was a Ledger Nano S, a hardware wallet. Carol held it up by the corner with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. She asked what this stupid thing was. One of my tech-savvy cousins explained it was a crypto wallet, but that it was useless without the password and a 24-word recovery phrase. He said the contents were probably lost forever. My aunt laughed. It was a sharp, dismissive sound. She looked directly at me from across the room. "Here, Alex," she said, her voice dripping with condescending pity. "You were so fond of Arthur's little hobbies. You can have his useless plastic toy, a souvenir of your crazy uncle's fantasy." And then she tossed it to me. The small device clattered onto the dusty floor at my feet. My cousin snickered. I felt a hot flush of shame and anger creep up my neck. I bent down, picked it up, and slipped it into my pocket without a word. I did not care about the money. I was just so tired of them mocking him, even after he was gone. I took it home that night and put it in a shoebox in the back of my closet, intending to keep it simply as the last thing my uncle had touched, a memento of the man they had never bothered to understand. Update 2. Weeks turned into months. Life went on. The family sold Arthur's house for a handsome profit, and everyone got their inheritance check. They immediately started spending it on new cars, kitchen renovations, and expensive vacations, all while complaining that Arthur should have invested more wisely so they could have gotten more. I put my small share into a savings account and tried not to think about them. I was struggling. A major budget cut at the university meant my hours were being reduced. I was having trouble making rent, and the thought of having to ask my family for a loan was my worst nightmare. I felt like a failure, just a quiet archivist in a family of loud successes. One rainy Saturday, I was feeling particularly low. To distract myself, I decided to finally go through a box of old books Arthur had left for me. They were mostly vintage science fiction paperbacks from the 70s. As I was flipping through one, a story about rebuilding civilization after an apocalypse, a memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was from about 10 years ago. I was 17, visiting Arthur. He was in one of his manic, excited states, trying to explain the concept of a seed phrase to me. He could see my eyes glazing over with the technical details. So he changed tactics. He loved games and riddles. He looked at me with that intense, gleaming look in his eyes and told me he was going to give me a secret. He said it was a poem. A key. He made me write it down. It was a string of 12 simple, seemingly random words. I remember them vividly because they were so strange together. River. Whisper. Atlas. Coin. Horizon. Echo. Engine. North. Velvet. Anchor. Shadow. Key. I had written them on a bookmark that I had long since lost. I asked him what it was for. He just smiled. "That, Alex," he had said, "is the key to the Library of Alexandria. 12 little words to save a world of knowledge from burning." At the time, I thought it was just Uncle Arthur being his usual eccentric self, a poetic but meaningless phrase. But now, sitting in my apartment a decade later, with his useless hardware wallet sitting in a box in my closet, the pieces crashed together in my mind with a deafening roar. 12 words. A key. Not 24, like my cousin had said, but many wallets used 12. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. There was no way. It was impossible. It was just a coincidence. But what if it was not? With trembling hands, I went to my closet and dug out the shoebox. The ledger was sitting right where I had left it. I blew the dust off it and went to my computer. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. I Googled how to restore a ledger wallet. I found a tutorial. I plugged the device into my computer. The tiny screen lit up. The setup process asked me if I wanted to configure a new device or restore from a recovery phrase. I clicked Restore. It prompted me for the first word. My mind went blank with panic for a second. Then it came back to me. River. I typed it in. The device suggested the full word. I confirmed. It asked for the second word. Whisper. I typed it. Atlas. Coin. Horizon. With each word, my heart beat faster. Echo. Engine. North. I was sweating now. Velvet. Anchor. Shadow. I got to the final word. Key. I typed it in and confirmed. The screen said, "Your device is ready." My heart sank a little. I thought a balance would just appear. The tutorial explained I needed to install the Bitcoin app on the device and then use the desktop software to view the accounts. I followed the steps, my hope dwindling. It felt too complicated. This was probably all for nothing. I opened the desktop application and clicked Add Account. It synced with the device. A progress bar slowly filled. And then, it loaded. A new account appeared on my screen. I stared at the numbers. I could not process them at first. The numbers were 187.41 Bitcoin. I did not even know what that meant. I quickly opened a new tab and typed 187.41 BTC to USD into the search bar. And I saw the result. As of that day's market price, the value was $8,433,574. I stared at the screen for a full 5 minutes, completely motionless. I refreshed the page. The number was still there. I had not just inherited a small sum. My uncle, the man my family had mocked and dismissed for his entire life, had left me a king's ransom on a useless plastic toy. Update 3. For a full week, I did absolutely nothing. I was in a state of shock. I told no one. I went to my job at the archive, I ate my meals, I went to sleep, but my life was now divided into two distinct parts: the quiet, struggling archivist the world saw, and the secret multimillionaire I was in private. I spent my evenings learning everything I could. I contacted a highly recommended lawyer who specialized in digital assets and a certified financial planner. My first move was to secure the funds. We carefully transferred small test amounts to a new, secure, institutional-grade custody account. Once we confirmed everything was working, we moved the rest. The fortune was real, and it was now safe. And it was mine. The weight of my financial struggles vanished overnight. The fear of making rent, the stress of my reduced hours, it all just evaporated. But a new, heavier weight took its place. What was I going to do about my family? My Uncle Arthur had been a kind and generous man. But he was also not a fool. He knew his family. He knew their greed and their condescension. He had left them a comfortable but not extravagant inheritance from his traditional assets. This, the crypto fortune, was something else. It felt like a test, a final riddle. He had given the key to the one person who had valued his ideas over his money. What did that mean I was supposed to do? A few weeks later, my Aunt Carol called me. It was the first time she had called me since the will reading. She did not ask how I was. She launched straight into a complaint about how the money from the house sale was not stretching as far as she had hoped, after taxes. Then she asked, in a voice dripping with fake sweetness, "So, Alex, did you ever figure out what to do with that stupid USB stick from Arthur? Did you get your $5 for it on eBay?" That was the moment I made my decision. The anger I had felt when she had tossed the ledger at my feet came rushing back. But this time it was not the hot anger of humiliation. It was a cold, calm, and clear anger. I told her that, as a matter of fact, I had been meaning to talk to the family about Arthur's hobby. I invited her, my uncles, and my cousins to a dinner the following Saturday. I told them I was treating. I booked a private room at the most expensive restaurant in the city. Their curiosity was piqued. I could hear the greed in Carol's voice as she accepted. She probably assumed my reduced hours at work meant I was about to beg them for a loan. Update 4. The night of the dinner was surreal. I arrived early and sat waiting for them. They all walked in, dressed to the nines, looking around the fancy restaurant with proprietary airs. They sat down, and the condescension began immediately. They asked me how my little library job was going. They offered me unsolicited career advice. They treated me like the poor relation I had always been. I let them talk. I ordered the best champagne, the most expensive appetizers. I just smiled and listened. Finally, during a lull in the conversation, my Aunt Carol leaned forward and said, "So, Alex, it's lovely that you brought us all here, but we all know you've been struggling a bit lately. What is it you need?" The whole table looked at me with expectant, pitying eyes. This was my moment. I took a slow sip of water. I looked each of them in the eye, and then I told them. I told them that Arthur's useless plastic toy was a hardware wallet. I told them that 10 years ago, Arthur had given me a 12-word poem that I had thought was just a strange little game. I explained that this poem was a seed phrase. I told them that this seed phrase had unlocked the wallet. I let that hang in the air for a moment. My cousin, the stockbroker, was the first to speak. He laughed. "A seed phrase? Alex, what are you talking about? What was on it? $100? 500? I looked at him and said, "It contained 187 Bitcoin. He stopped laughing. His face went pale. He knew exactly what that meant. The rest of the table was silent, confused. My other uncle asked what a Bitcoin was worth. My cousin, his voice a choked whisper, did the math out loud. At today's price, that's, oh my God, that's over $8 million. The silence that followed was the most profound silence I have ever experienced. You could have heard a pin drop. Then, the explosion. It started with Aunt Carol. Her face, which had been a mask of pity, contorted into a snarl of pure rage. She shrieked that it was impossible, that I was lying. Then, when she realized I was not, her tone shifted to one of righteous indignation. She said that was family money. She said Arthur would have wanted it to be shared. My uncle, the one who had told Arthur to stop playing with magic internet money, started yelling that I had somehow tricked or manipulated Arthur. They all started talking at once, their voices rising, their faces ugly with greed and envy. They were not happy for me. They were furious that this fortune had not been theirs. I let them exhaust themselves. When they finally quieted down, I spoke. My voice was calm and steady. I told them that Arthur had spent 15 years trying to share his passion with them, and they had done nothing but laugh at him. They had called him a fool and a child. They had mocked his legacy. They had tossed his final gift to me on the floor like a piece of garbage. I told them that Arthur's gift was not just money. It was a reward for the one person who had listened, the one person who had shown him respect. I told them that their inheritance was the check they had already received and spent. This was mine. I stood up, placed enough cash on the table to cover the extravagant meal, and walked out of the restaurant, leaving them all sitting there in stunned, furious silence. I have not spoken to them since. I used a portion of the money to create a scholarship in Arthur's name for promising young software engineers. The rest, I am investing wisely. I still work at the archive, but now I do it because I love it, not because I have to. My uncle gave me more than money. He gave me freedom, and he gave me the last laugh.